Hey, everybody. Tuesday morning, we are live. I'm not really sure how Trenton and I ended up with a group of people like this, me especially. Trenton's like, I'm in this group. I'm kind of like, you're not quite at the quality of a Dr. McCord, but we're excited to be here nonetheless. We're talking with some expert educators from around the nation. And Trenton, I'm going to hand it over to you. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. And you are right. We have no business being in such good company. And I have to say, I'm so excited because it's been a while, Pat and Justin and Dr. McCord, since we've had an opportunity to chat either one-on-one, and now we're all together. And so I'm really excited. I'm excited about this conversation because I think it's an important one. And we'll get into kind of the gist of what we're going to be talking about today. But I want to start with some just quick introductions. Tell us a bit about yourself, background, all that sort of thing. And we'll start with Dr. McCord, and we'll go up to Pat, and we'll go over to Justin, if that's how it looks on your screen. So Dr. McCord.
Well, thanks, Trenton. I'm excited to be here and in this thoughtful conversation. Anytime I can be a part of a conversation with thought about education, it brings me a lot of pleasure because I'm looking forward to learning as well. My background in education, I have a math background as a teacher, was an assistant principal for a very short time. I kind of did what I like to call the one and done. And I'm sure we'll kind of discuss that a little bit more down the road. And then spent the majority of my time as an instructional coach, as an educator, and then moved into working as a district leader in school improvement. So I've just kind of been around the gamut there. Currently, I work as an independent consultant, and I work with schools and districts, working with math and technology integration, professional development. So that's, just a little bit about me. And that's kind of how I came to learn of Trenton and the wonderful platform. I know we're not plugging here, but I can't help but a little plug. Those who know me, if anyone is watching who knows me, I'm going to plug anytime. Mastery Connect, creator of this wonderful co-creator and founder of this wonderful program and platform that I was able to utilize in all of the aspects of my educational career thus far, and still do as an independent consultant. And so, so I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you guys.
I'm excited that you're here, and you're our second Dr. McCord.
Yes, by the way, yes, I am. I am the second Dr. McCord in the family. My husband, Dr. Gregory McCord, of 28 years now. He is a school superintendent here in the district where we live in Marlborough County in South Carolina.
Yeah, you're really our first Dr. McCord. Don't tell Gregory I said that. But the second to be on with us here. So it's an intimidating family, amazing group. But Dr. McCord, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on. Pat.
Sure thing. My name is Pat Coleman. I'm the incoming principal right now at Lorraine High School. We're a large urban high school outside of Northeast Ohio on the near west side. In terms of my background, I've been in education longer than I care to count. I don't want to put a number on it, I guess, at this point, but spent 15 years in the classroom, spent 5 years as an instructional coach. 10 of those years teaching were around teaching high school chemistry at Euclid High School. I did some time working for a company by the name of Mastery Connect and providing some data-driven leadership for school districts, partnering with that solution. Amazing tool, no doubt about that. I worked for a couple of years as an assistant principal at Lorraine High School, moved over, and I'm actually in a transition phase right now. I've worked for the past 2 years as the principal at Cuyahoga Heights High School and Cuyahoga Heights Middle School. So being over two buildings, two really small buildings, it's been an amazing experience there, but I'm happy to be transitioning back to what's been a little bit of a professional home for me here in Lorraine. So excited to be in this role, leading this high school.
Awesome. Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin Montagnier, assistant principal at Albion Middle School. This is my third year here, just going into my third year. Primarily, I've worked in high schools, but as my own children have gotten older, a high school gig was just too many nighttime activities. I do love high school. I was a high school teacher, Spanish teacher, high school wrestling coach. And I do miss that aspect, but it's good to be with my kids at night and on the weekends as they do sports and different things. But I'm really enjoying the middle school assistant principal role. And I'm excited to be here. I know Trenton from Master Connect as well. I did leave, and I'll put a number on mine, Pat. I'm halfway through this journey, I think, 15 years into education. But 1 year I spent at Master Connect. Phenomenal product. I love it. But I missed the school. I missed the student relationships and just being here with teachers. And that's just really where my heart is and my passion. So tried it out, private sector. It was a lot of fun, and good to be here back in the public sector. And I like what Trenton's doing in structure, Canvas. Really, I mean, I'm sure for you guys as well, it was a godsend when all the coronavirus and everything hit. I don't know what we would have done. I mean, I guess just printed a whole bunch of packets. But as a tool, Instructure and Canvas was just essential for us as delivering instruction. So,
yeah, so that's a perfect segue into this conversation that I want to have today. And I thought a lot about this. Every one of us has been an assistant principal. And so, it's one of those roles that when I reflect back on my time as an assistant principal, I was a middle school assistant principal for a period of time. And I remember having this feeling like this job matters. Like, I don't think people really appreciate how much that job matters. I felt like in a lot of ways, I was working with students who were right on the cusp of getting lost. Like if we could just grab these kids right now, get them kind of recentered, let them know that there's somebody here who really cares for them. Like we could recenter these kids. And I love that part of the job, but I also felt a lot of the time like I was overwhelmed with just doing the, dean of students thing, right? Where I was the disciplinarian and, I was dealing with referrals. I could never get on top of the referrals, that post lunchtime, oh God, they come, it's like, how am I going to get through all of this? And that was great. I enjoyed that, but I missed being an instructional leader. I missed being part of, that process. And I feel like as we've gone through, the experience we've had over the last few months, school, most everybody's been in a remote setting. It's maybe an opportunity for us to really think about that role of the assistant principal and how important it could be right now as we're rethinking how do we best support students as we come back in the fall, whether that's in a full-time back to school, whether that's some sort of blended model, or whether we are working remote. How do we engage that particular role maybe in a more meaningful way to better support students in our building? And Pat, I would love to kind of get your thoughts as you're thinking about that. Having been an assistant principal, having been a principal, now you're going into a new school, you've got administrators, assistant principals, you're building a team thinking about how do we actually just best utilize the people to meet our objectives here?
So, yeah, and like I said, we're in a place right now where we're kind of just finished building out a team. So at Lorain High School, again, we're a pretty big school, approximate enrollments around 1,800 students. So I have an associate principal and I have 5 assistant principals. So I'm fortunate to have a really big team and just kind of culminated the process of recruiting and building out that team. And when we looked at kind of identifying, core traits that we wanted in terms of folks who were going to recruit and hire, instructional acumen and the ability to serve as an instructional leader was prime amongst them. That along with being a relationship builder, those were the 2 most important characteristics that we wanted to flush out and make sure we had in place with all of our candidates. I would say, generally speaking, you're spot on. Whether it's the principalship or the assistant principalship, at the end of the day, the operations of a school building can pull you down and keep you weighted in your chair in your office if you let it. You have to proactively fight against that. I would contend having a strong relationship with your kids, having a strong relationship with teachers is going to be kind of the number one component to making sure that you're not letting the operations of the school, again, kind of weigh you down. When I think back to kind of the best days I've had on the job and some of the toughest days I've had on the job, and I think about things I regret, kind of going through that inventory of what my day looked like, I never regret putting off the paperwork. I never regret letting that stuff, kind of sit a little longer than I need to. Where I've had really bad days and I kind of look back and said, boy, I wish I would have done things a little differently. It's boy, I wish I would have spent a little more time, with that teacher, supporting them or getting a feel for why they think they might be struggling. That type of practice is what I feel like there isn't necessarily the time in the day for. And so you've got to create that time. You've got to be really, really proactive around, finding a way to connect with human beings, connect with people. And that's what it's about. Ultimately, when we're talking about operational stuff, when we're talking about instructional leadership, when you talk about an assistant principal kind of taking on that instructional leader role, at the end of the day, again, it's about building relationships with teachers. There's an instructional coaching, and I'm sure we'll dive into this in more detail. There's an instructional coaching approach to growing teachers. There's an evaluative approach to growing teachers. And both of those ultimately map back to, do you have a strong instructional relationship with those folks? If you do, you can grow them. If you don't, it's difficult to grow folks.
Yeah. I like the way that you kind of articulated that, Pat. And I like what Kathy is saying there too. This is giving us time to rethink a little bit. It's giving us time to think about, the administrator as an instructional leader. And I would love for you, Angela, you were an assistant principal for a short period of time, but you went out you didn't go, down that path of, I'm going to go be a principal and all that other stuff. You said, I want to be an instructional coach. I want to get kind of dialed into that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So what Patrick said really resonated because we had a little saying, my husband and I, when I became an assistant principal, he said, you know what they call that position, right? You're going to be handling buses, books, and butts. Yeah. So the butts part, right, that Patrick was referring to, that was the biggest thing in my experience, just kind of, knowing how to channel that. And like you said, knowing how to manage that time so that you are not pinned up in your office all day, because you need to be present, for your teachers. And in my experience with all of that, I kind of said to myself, well, as an instructional coach, I am able to be more hands-on with teachers. I'm right there. You kind of don't have that. You don't have as much of that paperwork, with the students. And so that really kind of made a difference for me, because back in 2012, I think from that period of time until now, I've seen through working with schools and districts that there is a change. There has been a change where, just like Patrick said, he's building his team. More principals and more district leaders want assistant principals to be able to function in that role as an instructional leader as well. So you kind of, they are choosing folks with a balance and scheduling. I say scheduling, but creating their team with such, having an assistant principal have a role, or a specialty in mathematics or a specialty in English language arts. So I'm happy to see that change as I work with different schools and districts. But in the past, that has definitely, not been the case. So now that as we have evolved, that makes a huge difference, because teachers are able to have that support, and they can have support for their content area and for having instructional questions, and not just view assistant principals as, here comes, bad news, McCord. One assistant principal said that I interviewed her recently, and she said one of the students made a nickname for her, and every time he saw her, he called her Bad News Coleman, so things like that. I think sometimes assistant principals get a bad rep, because of having to take care of those different duties.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we all went to school because we wanted to be educators. We wanted to connect with kids. We wanted to make a difference. Some of us loved math and some of us loved chemistry. And I worry about those of you who did, because I wasn't in that spectrum. I kind of loved it. I taught elementary school, and I loved being able to integrate curriculum and things like that. And so that passion that we have as teachers is, oftentimes when we look at the assistant principalship, none of us really went to school thinking, I want to be a disciplinarian. I want to be on phone calls with parents telling them, your child did X, Y, and Z. Even though I think I learned that was as much an instructional role in terms of helping to support students in their growth in terms of behavior and other things. And then also working with teachers. But it's weird how we're willing to kind of push all of that into a space, and we don't capitalize on the assistant principal as an instructional leader as much as we ought to. Justin, what are your thoughts on that?
I think what first comes to mind is the shifting of the role. I became an assistant principal in 2009, and so I've been at this almost a decade, and I have seen a significant shift as far as like when I first began. Our district had a lot of like zero tolerance policies, and it was like, oh, you did this, suspended, gone, goodbye, got you out of school, and it was progressive. It was like 3 days, 10 days, up to like a full quarter, and for drug and alcohol offenses, it'd be like a whole year, eventually like 180-day suspension. And, that never felt right. I mean, I was a brand new assistant principal, and I was just like, really, this is what we do? And some people were like, yep, you gotta, drop the hammer kind of thing. And some of those students, they are challenging, and you would think, wow, like this kid on his next one, he's gone for a whole quarter. And sadly, a little piece of maybe a lot of you is kind of like, yay, my life just, and that's just so sad, right? But that was the truth of it. And now I've seen it switch to where, I suspended out of school, less than 5 times this year, and that's for, physical altercations and whatnot, like safety of others. We're really geared up towards, restorative justice and sitting down and, talking it out and building the relationship piece, peer to peer, student to teacher. And I think it's working. I know it's working. It's helping those students have those skills to go on into high school and function, better, not just as students, but also like citizens of our community, right? And that's been, I guess, when you're thinking of instructional leader, that the administrators in our district sort of, we received the training early on, so we were the earlier adapters, and then our job was to then kind of take that message to the teachers. And I think some older school, if I can use that term, teachers, they've been at it, they're almost 30 years, and they're like, hey, what's the deal here? This kid, if they're being disrespectful, they need to be gone. They use this language, they need to be gone. And I was like, well, actually what we need to do is revisit why they're behaving that way and focus on the behaviors and reteaching so that they can stay at school. School's the place that they need to be, right? And they're not getting it for whatever reason, just because we've taught it. It's middle school. Yes, they should know how to behave a little more appropriately in the cafeteria. They don't, for a number of reasons. So let's talk about it. And the talk about it is where the real work happens, right? I have had conversations with students in my office, significant conversations, obviously getting their parents on the phone, talking through it. Sometimes parents are shocked. They're like, wait, you're not sending them home? And I'm like, no, we're going to do some things. It's school. They're going to work away from other students, but they're still going to be here at school working. And then we're going to get them back into the class. And where apologies need to be made, they're going to be made, right? Hopefully of their own volition, right? That student motivated. And when you do all of that, I think one of the frustrating things I have right now, and maybe it's a little off topic, but as assistant principal, is I can get those students back into the class. And sometimes, this isn't all teachers, but sometimes teachers are like, well, nothing happened. Nothing happened. This kid did that, and I can't even believe that they're back in my room. And I'm like, what do you mean nothing happened? I just spent half my day like reteaching behaviors so that a student can do better the next time, right? We give them another chance, another opportunity. So anyway, that for me has been, kind of the bulk of maybe the last 5 years, is like making that transition, that switch.
Yeah, and I love the way that you describe that, and I like that Dr. McCord is kind of commented as well. His previous comment, I think, was an important one when he talks about, this all depends on how we're preparing our APs. We should be seeing them as our future principals, our future instructional leaders. And where you were tying that together, I think so importantly, Justin, was this idea that, we send kids home away from school that need us the most, at a time when they need us the most. And, I remember I remember feeling like some kids were acting out to go home, and it was like we were facilitating that behavior. When I don't want to be at school anymore, if I act out, I'll go home. And the adults in their lives were exhausted, and kids knew it. And we have opportunities to kind of rethink the way we approach that. And I like that you brought up also that I remember the example I always gave was, a kid would come down to my office with a referral because they didn't bring a pencil to school or to class with them. And you just knew every time what the teacher was going to say about that didn't have a pencil. And they would always say, it's not about the pencil. It's about the disrespect they show me in the classroom. And I think, these are kids. And our opportunity is to find ways to connect with kids, to show them that, we are there and we're there to support them. Angela, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree that, we are there to support the students as well as the administrators in that role of assistant principal. Totally agree. And you caught me when you said that the teacher might say it's about the disrespect. But one of the comments I got about students having referrals for, not having, pencils or paper or, whatever. Some comments that I got were it's about responsibility. We're teaching them responsibility. And I never quite agree with that, that concept, because, that's not how to teach students responsibility, sending them out, sending them away. As Justin said, get out, you don't have your things, go away. You're speaking out of turn, get out, so things like that. I think we have to, we definitely need to take a look at that. And there have been a lot of changes, thanks to programs like restorative practices. And, that is great that a lot of schools are implementing those.
Yeah. And I think it can be challenging, even though on paper it sounds so much like the right thing. You do have teachers who are exhausted in their classroom saying, I have to, it's hurting all the other kids in my class. It's, making me not want to come to work. I would say to teachers all the time, like, when people say, I've never had a bad year. Every year is amazing. And, it just takes one student to make you question whether or not your decision to be a teacher was a good one. And teachers are looking at administrators to say, help. That becomes your job. And to me, it's not a disciplinary one. It's an instructional one. It is an opportunity for us to provide the support for the students, but also the support for teachers. Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of stuck on what Greg McCord, Dr. McCord mentioned earlier in the thread, and you kind of brought this up. It makes a difference how APs are being prepared for the principalship. It's interesting when you look at how schools are being built and managed. There's a lot being borrowed from the private sector, and I think when you look at companies that are successful, you have specialization is all over the place. You have people that are experts in product and experts at X, Y, and Z. And I actually think when it comes to schools and teachers and kids, there's a danger in specialization. When you move, one of the things you learn when you move from an assistant principal to the principalship is you don't have the bandwidth to specialize any longer. You become a bit of a generalist. You have to kind of have your thumb on the pulse of lots of different things, but you're not going to have the time to specialize in any one thing. What you need to specialize in is process.
Yeah.
And yeah, that process, whether it's, again, growing teachers instructionally, supporting students behaviorally or social emotionally, like, the process really is pretty consistent. It's relationship building. We've talked about that a little bit. It's collaborating with stakeholders. It's a tiered approach to things. It's a tiered approach to support. We have RTI and this tiered approach to academic intervention baked into our DNA right now as educators. But I'm really excited to see models like MTSS starting to evolve, where we're kind of taking that approach to supporting instruction and applying that to behavior. Look at a good PBIS model. You have a tiered approach to intervening with kids around behavior, a tiered approach to social emotional, a tiered approach to attendance, and where the schools are. When you examine the schools that are improving, one of the things that's supporting that is the interrelatedness of those practices. They're getting really sharp on process. And not so much, if they're specializing in anything, it's that process that we know works to support, again, collaboration, relationship building, tiered approach to support. That's what does the work. So when you look at how we grow and support assistant principals at the start of their career, when you look at like a dean of students model, you're asking them to specialize in one area, and not giving them that breadth. You're not preparing them for the next step. It's that classic case of, the skills that got you to this position aren't going to keep you there, kind of thing. So I think it's important when folks are in that assistant principal role to kind of develop that ability to generalize a little bit and specialize in process, but generalize around, I need to support students behaviorally, I need to support teachers instructionally, I need to support parents in terms of engagement. There's a number of different facets here that are going to make us successful. And it's easy to say, specialization works. It works in a lot of sectors. I don't think it works in schools. And so when we look at the structures we create for assistant principals to work, we need to be really mindful of that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's funny, when I was an assistant principal, I think a lot of your experience is based on the relationship you have with your principal and how your principal actually sees you and your role. I was really lucky. I worked with a world-class principal. She was just absolutely brilliant and a great mentor. And I felt very, very fortunate. But I also remember feeling like later on, as I was given more opportunities to support teachers in more of an instructional support model, I remember feeling like I had to spend so much time building the trust of the teachers, because for so long they had just seen that person as, I don't know what they do in that office back there, but they're not part of. Like, I almost didn't feel a part of the instructional team. Like, I had to say, I'm an educator, just like you guys, and I found myself having to build the trust and the relationship with teachers. What has your experience, Justin, been in that regard?
That's crucial. It's so important. If I've been so I was at Hillcrest for like 4 years, and then I've been here. This will be going into my 3rd year. And when you go to a new building, like, that's the thing that you have to establish first, is the relationship and the trust, so that they know, teachers know, students know. I mean, you kind of start all over again, but they want to know what you're about. And I like to get to that place where it's like non-evaluative. I'm not, I don't have my clipboard. I'm not running numbers here. If you're having a problem with a student, like, let me help you. Let's talk through it. Let's come up with some ideas. And to go back to my previous comments, with how things have changed, I've mostly focused on administrators, but it's obviously also changed for the teachers as well. And I think that, as we interview like new teacher candidates and hire, I hired two teachers straight out of college, just begin this new year. And, I'm amazed when I ask them the questions about that, about building relations, about discipline, about just their response to how I guess the level that they understand the importance of that, creating the relationship, right? Like greeting their students at the door when they walk in during the day, finding out something about them other than like non-school related, what are their hobbies? What are they doing? So I think it's definitely changed, even with, sort of that group of new teacher, which is awesome. Because as we're instructional leaders, you have to think, if the teaching career, we want it to be 30 years, there's just going to be various phases of those teachers learning, right? So I'm thinking of my 2 new teachers this year. I'm going to treat them differently, as I approach them and build a relationship and help them have the trust, right? But I'm not going to pile on everything. Like I can't just go PBIS, blah, 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 blah. You gotta do this, and this, right? If we just start making a long list for them, because they already have all the things that they need to do. So you have to support and just kind of listen with what they're going to start out doing, and then, give sort of those like small recommendations and just kind of monitor and be there to support and help. And when things maybe fall short or don't go wrong, just let them know that's okay. It's that we're failing forward. And then the same thing for maybe a veteran teacher, who's got 20 years in the business, and they're like, why is this happening to me? And then they figure, as you get older as an educator, right, you feel like you should have these answers. And I know people do, they come to me as an assistant principal, they're like, you should just know all this. And I'm like, well, this is a completely different set of circumstances. The scenario has changed, especially with like COVID-19. It's like, this is our first go through like the pandemic, education in a pandemic, right? So it's just, if you understand one another, if you have trust and have built the relationship, then you're going to work through those problems together, right? And people aren't going to feel sort of threatened or anxious about, trying to come up with ideas. But if they do feel that way, or if they're working out of fear, I feel like they're going to hold back, and they're going to, have sort of the parking lot conversations, and things aren't going to, progress the way that you want them to. So yeah, once again, just always coming back to building relationships and recognizing where everybody is in different phases of their career, right?
What you just talked about, I think, really highlighted what Pat was talking about moments ago in that generalist kind of mindset. But also, I think this is kind of where I wanted to get in terms of new things that we're dealing with COVID. I actually was talking to my wife, who is a teacher also, and saying, I can't imagine what it must be like for someone who just graduated from university, going into the teaching profession, getting hired now with the uncertainty of you may be in a full remote environment, and they may be fairly comfortable with that. Who knows? Depends. You may be doing some sort of a blended model, or you may be right back in a classroom with all of the fear and anxiety that's associated with that. I'm going to come back to you, Pat, as you were listening to Justin, and I kind of wanted to frame this from the standpoint of, in today's world, this isn't like the beginning of last year or the year before that or any other year previous. This is an all hands on deck. We need everybody working together. And I'm thinking of our new teachers coming in, and just the way you talked about it, Justin, I would be like, as a new teacher, just grateful that there was not just, a principal or a team member, but an assistant principal that I could go to and talk to and feel that support. I felt that from you. Pat, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, as Justin was speaking, one of the words I wrote down was, I thought this was really astute. He talked about kind of cutting through the fear associated with dealing with, as a teacher, being evaluated versus being instructionally coached. And one of the important things, to your point, Trenton, now more so than ever, with all the variables and all the uncertainty, it's important for assistant principals to be able to successfully navigate that and probably wear a little more of an instructional coaching hat more so than an evaluative hat. And I guess here's what I mean when I say this, again, to piggyback on Justin's comments. At the end of the day, the evaluation system in Ohio is what's called the OTES framework, the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. And we have 4 ratings: ineffective, developing, skilled, accomplished. And, when people are rated as ineffective or developing, you're pressing their survival buttons as teachers. So it can be really, really challenging to navigate that, while also kind of, as Justin highlighted, getting teachers to move away from a place of being fearful of those types of conversations, that evaluation practice, that evaluation cycle, and get them to a place where they're willing to take some risks. In order to grow and get better as a teacher, you've got to be comfortable taking risks, and you've got to feel a sense of, in order to do that, you've got to feel a sense of partnership with who's supporting you, who's evaluating you, who's coaching you. I would say this: I don't think I've ever successfully OTES evaluated anyone from developing to skilled or skilled to accomplished. It doesn't work that way. Where I've been fortunate enough to be successful to help grow teachers instructionally, it's been through the relationship piece. And so ultimately, regardless of of the framework we're using as evaluators, if we are successfully building instructional relationships with our teachers, where we're building trust, we're providing lots of frequent, low stakes, informal feedback. Those are the calling cards for helping teachers feel comfortable being humble, being vulnerable with you as their evaluator, and like I said, ultimately kind of setting fear aside and becoming comfortable with taking some instructional risks. And again, with COVID, it's easy to put ourselves in a place where everything needs to change. I think more so than things needing to change, I just go back to it reinforcing the importance of what I just said. Because there are so many unknowns, because there are so many variables, as leaders, we need to model that kind of humility, that level of reflection, and a little bit of risk taking. I think if we're doing that, we're modeling that, and we're supporting our teachers in doing that. Our teachers are seeing us support them through that process. That's as important as anything we can do given everything going on.
Yeah. I have two final kind of questions, kind of wrap things up a little bit. And one of them is really for you, Angela, in your role of being more of that instructional coach, especially support for folks in the world of tech and everything else. One thing that has become abundantly clear is that we have had an experience for teachers where they've had to make a significant change in their instructional practice, and a lot of teachers having to adopt the remote learning model where they're using a tool like Canvas to do remote learning. And that kind of the stress and anxiety that teachers felt of, okay, number one, we've got a pandemic, we're going to be out of school, we don't really know for how long. I want learning and everything to kind of continue and work. A lot of people started out with some basic packets, like it was going to be a 2-week break or something. And then the realization that, oh my gosh, this is going to be long-term. And we saw people transitioning, like utilizing an LMS like Canvas as a tool. And so now you have teachers who have the stress and anxiety of all of those things with, I've really got to become way more proficient in learning these tools. And I believe success or failure is going to be based on what kind of supports exist for them within their own learning community, whether that's other teachers, coaches, administrators who were putting in and building the environment for teachers to feel supported and work on that.
Absolutely. Trenton, when Patrick, I jotted down the word processes that Patrick talked about, creating those processes. When I worked as school improvement specialist, working with schools, I worked with side by side with principals to execute and create processes. That is so important. And the process of being an instructional leader, as an assistant principal, as administrators in the building, when you talked about low stakes feedback, one of the ways I always stress about that will help implement was something like called the 3-minute walkthrough. I don't know if you guys have read that book. Everybody's nodding, right? That's a great one, right? Because it really starts you, it lets you see every instructional leader needs to be in that classroom every day. And it's not about going in to be evaluative, every time. It's about being seen. It's about being supportive. It's about looking at, different points and being able to get together as administrators and look at that whole picture. So anyway, I love that concept, and that process has helped a lot of schools. And so now I've been thinking, as I've had to rethink a lot of my my instructional plans as a consultant, right? And because of COVID, we don't know how things are going to be. But I think about that. How will teachers get that support? And so my first thought is that, taking that simple book or that concept, that 3-minute walkthrough, we're going to have to, as leaders, be ready to, go into platforms as co-teachers, into Canvas and, help support teachers, go in there and view, just to give that, little bit of on-time feedback, not just, as Justin said, they're going to have a laundry list of things anyway. And I just think about the new teachers as well. But that's definitely important. Administrators being able to know the platforms and be able to assist and guide teachers as they go through, because we still need to have our systems and processes in place if we happen to go fully remote. So it's such a time now that we just don't know what to expect, but we can definitely plan for these things. And I do believe that there are, plans that we can create if we happen to have to be 100% remote. And thinking about those plans, we need to definitely, of course, keep students at the forefront. How can we keep students engaged, right? And, still touch base with those students. We have students that, you talked about earlier, how kids may get in trouble so that they can go home. Well, I know from being an administrator, there are kids that don't want to go home, things like that. So, just being able to support teachers in those efforts as well. So I think it's really going to be important for us to take that concept, if we are, partially remote or 100% remote, and just learn how to go in to these platforms and go in and work with teachers.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's interesting, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the notion that I believe teaching is a series of complex human events. And in this conversation, I can just feel the complexity of the things that we've been talking about. I mean, we've skirted a bunch of different issues. And it really brings back this idea for me that role of the assistant principal. There's a lot of opportunity if you are a principal, if you're district level administrators and you're thinking, how do we offload or build additional capacity to support our teachers right now, given all that's going on? That environment of utilizing our assistant principals and maybe helping us think about that. I'm going to let you each answer this last question fairly quickly. We've gone a little long. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank all of you too for this conversation, because I feel like we could do this for another 45 minutes and just continue to scratch the surface. But I want to come back to this kind of where we started in the beginning, which is, this role of the assistant principal and the need to evolve. And I love what Justin talked about, that feeling of that role is evolving, and we're less in that mindset of just being a dean of students, although I think that that's going to vary from place to place. But I also believe that so much of that is going to be contingent on whether or not principals, I believe in enlightened leadership. I believe in people who kind of see those things, but it's going to be contingent on the leader in the building, creating an environment where that can happen, or a culture where that happens. And anytime I've ever interviewed anybody for any job, the one thing that I look for more than anything is whether or not I feel there is a sense of empathy from that person. Can they empathize with their students if I'm interviewing someone to be a teacher? If we're talking about administrators, do they have empathy for the teachers and for the students? And because, again, like, the older I get, the more I look at the way that I was when I was young and think, man, I was so full of it. Like, it's amazing how much I feel like more empathy I have for others than I did when I was younger. So I want to go from like Justin to Angela, and then Pat, we'll finish with you. Your thoughts on the importance of empathy, the importance of, having instructional leaders who value that role, and how important that assistant principal role can be, I think, in helping us as we're trying to solve these complex issues surrounding COVID-19.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great way to sum it up, what we've been discussing. We've had a lot about the importance of relationships. And I think, empathy is a huge, characteristic of a good relationship, being able to put yourself in the other person's, shoes. What would you do? When we released students, I've been on Canvas, I've seen Canvas, I've taken some courses, our district will use it as training, but I hadn't used it like as an instructional tool because, I was a Spanish teacher in 2005. I didn't have it. I wish I would have. It was cool. But when teachers started coming to me with questions, when students were released and they were at home, I was like, I'm not familiar enough with this. So I did the Canvas fast track, started creating a course. I've created a course now for like our 6th grade orientation in case that has to be done at home. So that was a fun exercise. And in doing that, myself, I feel like I became a lot more empathetic as to what teachers go through, to upload, to monitor like potentially the message boards and, just creating modules and everything that goes on with online learning. Anyway, I just think it's crucial that we develop that, as assistant principals, and that we remember, what it's like to be a classroom teacher. When I was in one of the high schools here, we did like an advisory period, and I was an assistant principal, but I took the class on because we were trying to have lower numbers, so basically able-bodied adults in the school could do it. And I had been out of the classroom for a minute, and I remember I went in as an advisory teacher and was given some instruction, and that's where we did a lot of character education. And there was this girl talking in the back of the class, and I remember thinking, what are you doing? How can you possibly be talking while I'm talking? Yeah, that brought me back to the empathy of like how difficult it is to be a classroom teacher, and our teachers are amazing and they do it day in, day out. They have hard kids, some years harder than others. And it's just challenging. So it's really important as assistant principals that we remember what it's like to be in their shoes, as a brand new teacher, middle career, and as you're getting closer to retirement. So if we can keep that empathy up, I think we'll have stronger relationships and be able to actually be, more effective instructional leaders. So that's just my thought on that.
Yeah, I like that.
Thanks for having me there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Justin. I agree. I'm glad you brought that up, Trenton. That having that empathy is so important, and not just to remember how we were or remember our roles, right? Our previous roles and what it was like to be a teacher, but also we have to think about now about a role that we did not have in this instance with COVID. So we have to think about the extra pressures and the anxiety and things that, it depends on if you're a new administrator or what segment of administrative or of administration you've dealt with. You may not be privy to, all of the anxiety or some of the issues that, not only our students face, but our adult leaders as well, leaders and teachers. So our teachers go through things as well. And I think it's important for us to have a certain amount of empathy as well. And that's going to be a balance, because I know that our first and foremost thoughts are for the students, which is why we are here as educators, right? However, so if I had to say, empathy, I would have to, say definitely. And then also a balance between being empathetic, but then also that measure of accountability, because we still want to be the best instructors that we can be. We want to be the best administrators that we can be. When I talk about teacher evaluation, one thing I always say, I've never met a teacher that comes in, that becomes a teacher, and when they start, they say, oh, my goal is to be the most awful teacher ever, right? That's not the case, right? We want to be good teachers. And so just keep that in mind as well. And I think that's really important as we, move through this uncertain time.
Yeah. Pat.
Yeah, and as I've listened to everyone, and Trenton, as I listened to you talk a little bit about your evolution, And it caused me to reflect a little bit on mine. And I thought a little bit about my first moments having the privilege to sit in someone else's classroom. And first coach, again, I spent 5 years as an instructional coach first, but then make that transition to an assistant principal and conducting evaluations and kind of weighing how empathy factors into all that. And as I thought about it, those first moments for me as an evaluator were really awkward. It's natural to start thinking, you got this big rubric and you're kind of looking at what they're doing and weighing this against what they talked about in their pre-conference. It's a lot to sort through. So the easy thing is to just kind of settle into this critical mindset, and you're kind of critiquing, and okay, you didn't do this, and you need to do this to hit this piece on the rubric. And so you kind of devolve into like a finding fault mode. And really quickly, as you have conversations with people, and as you engage in true instructional leadership, you break through that and you realize it's about, first of all, I think as a leader, expressing vulnerability, and really connoting a sense of how important it is to be a lifelong learner, how important it is for all of us, leaders especially, to be humble and be reflective. And ultimately, that's all wrapped around kind of an empathetic axle. So, the best leaders I've ever seen are incredibly reflective, humble people, but they're empathetic people as well. So it's as important a characteristic as any.
Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun to talk about this. I think a really important topic, at a really important time when we are seeing all that's going on, the fear and anxiety that exists in our communities with our parents and our students and our teachers being worried about what's to come, that we have this conversation where I think we expand a little bit to think about that broader sense of a community of instructional leaders within a building that have the opportunity to work together to solve some of these problems. And I know some people are probably thinking, I don't have an assistant principal. That would be awesome. It would be nice. But hopefully we've shed some light on here's 4 former assistant principals who love that role and that experience. And I would not have given up the growth that I made in my time as an assistant principal for anything. I felt like it was such a humbling, amazing learning experience for me. But this is just a super, I think, relevant topic at this time, and it's super nice to have it with you guys. So thanks, and thanks for everybody who joined us today.
Thank you, Trenton.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.